When the phone rang that night, I knew trouble had finally found my doorstep. What I didn't know was how far I'd have to go to protect my family. It was close to midnight when the shrill ring of the phone cut through the silence of my small living room. At my age, you don't expect good news after dark. I almost didn't answer it. But the voice on the other end wasn't a stranger. It was a voice I'd hoped I'd never hear again. "Your boy didn't know his place," the man said, slow and taunting. "And now he's gonna pay for it." The sound of ice rattling in his glass told me he was drunk, or maybe just drunk on the power he believed he held over everyone in this county. He was the mayor, a man wrapped in influence and corruption, a man who thought rules were only for other people. I sat frozen, staring at the old family photographs on the wall. My son, Michael, had just turned 21. He wasn't reckless, he wasn't loud. He was a quiet kid who loved working on cars with me at the garage. But that wasn't enough to keep him safe from men like the mayor or a spoiled nephew. My chest tightened as I listened. "Your boy should have kept his mouth shut," the voice said. "But he stood up in that diner tonight. Stood up when my nephew pushed that waitress around. That was a mistake. You know what happens when someone embarrasses us." Then came laughter. Not the kind you forget, not the kind you forgive. The line went dead. For a long time I sat there in the dark, the phone still pressed to my ear. Across the hall, Michael's bedroom door was shut, but I could see the light under the crack. He was awake, probably shaken, probably wondering if I had enough strength left in me to protect him. I leaned back and closed my eyes. Once upon a time, I had been a man who didn't just protect families, I protected the highest office in the land. 20 years in the U.S. Marshals taught me that silence was dangerous, that predators thrive when good men choose not to act. Back then, I planned security details the way generals planned wars. I knew escape routes, choke points, blind corners. I knew how to walk a president through hostile crowds without so much as a scratch. And I knew, with bitter certainty, that one wrong move could collapse the entire plan. Now, decades later, the mayor of this broken little town had made his move. And whether he realized it or not, he had just opened his own weakness to me. This wasn't just about my son. This was about every family too scared to speak, every neighbor who kept their head down while the mayor's nephew smashed windows, started fights, and sped drunk through stop signs. But when that boy laid his hands on Michael, when his laughter echoed in that call, the game changed. I wasn't built to sit quiet. I wasn't built to let tyrants write the rules. I opened my old notebook, the same one I used back in the Marshals when we planned protection routes. My pen shook, not from age, but from the weight of what I was about to do. Step by step, I began to map it out. His patterns, his weakness, his shadow route, the one he never realized he had. Because this wasn't going to be a fight in the streets. No guns, no fists. Just arrogance meeting gravity. Just a spoiled man learning that some of us had been trained our whole lives to turn silence into a weapon. That night, I made a decision. And once it was made, there was no turning back. For the first time in years, I felt alive again. But deep down, I also knew someone was going to lose everything before this ended. I spent nights in silence, listening to the streets breathe, knowing the slightest misstep could tip the balance. The following days passed like a slow, deliberate countdown. Michael went to school, pretending nothing had happened, hiding his pain under layers of normalcy. But I knew better. Pain leaves tracks, whether you see them or not. And predators, real predators, always leave traces too. I started my watch at dawn, long before the town even thought about waking up. From the corner of my garage, I observed the avenues and back streets, tracing every turn, every vehicle, every habitual stop. The mayor's nephew was predictable, as all arrogant children of power are. Every Friday, he would leave the diner at exactly 11:47 p.m., his red Mustang growling through the alleyways as if the pavement belonged to him. I didn't sleep much, nor did I need to. Years of surveillance work had trained me to see in shadows, to notice patterns others ignored. Tire marks, engine growls, the echo of laughter bouncing off brick walls, all spoke to me in a language only I could understand. The mayor, oblivious to the meticulous observation unfolding under his nose, continued his life as if the town's rules applied to everyone else but him. But the more I watched, the more I realized. The mayor's nephew's recklessness wasn't mere stupidity. It was a message, a warning to anyone who dared stand in their way. And now I had a message to send in return. I retraced every alley, every curve, every blind corner. I noted the streetlights that flickered, the potholes that could cause a sudden swerve, the dumpsters that would obscure a view. I memorized the sound of his engine, the weight of his tires on gravel, the rhythm of his stereo thumping through the night air. I knew the paths he took almost as well as he did. Then came the phone call that cemented everything. The mayor, thinking he could intimidate me, taunted, "Has he cried yet? Will he learn his lesson? You're nothing here. I'm untouchable." I smiled faintly. My teeth bit down on my lip, not from fear, but from controlled anger. I said calmly, "Yes, you own this town." And then I hung up. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was a tension so thick you could slice it with a knife. I ran through mental scenarios the way I used to plan motorcades. Every possibility, every wrong turn, every unexpected stop, cataloged, mapped, calculated. The boy's hubris would be his undoing. I just had to wait for the moment when arrogance and gravity would collide. Night after night I observed him. There was something poetic about it. A retired agent, hidden in plain sight, meticulously waiting for justice to unfold without lifting a weapon, without anyone realizing the storm about to hit. And while the town slept, thinking the streets were safe for the privileged, I learned its secrets. I learned where shadows hid, where corners swallowed mistakes, and where silence could be sharpened into a weapon. By the third week, I knew exactly when, where, and how the next lesson would be delivered. Michael slept through it all, unaware of the strategies forming outside his bedroom window. To him, the world was safe because his father's presence was silent, steady, like a shadow. But I knew that in that silence, I was preparing a storm that the mayor's nephew would never forget. And I, once a guardian of presidents, now became a sentinel of my own family, a shadow in the streets of a small town, watching, waiting, and calculating. I knew the first move would decide everything. One wrong step, one careless laugh, and the game would be lost forever. The night was unusually quiet, the kind of stillness that presses against your eardrums. I parked my old pickup 2 blocks from the diner where the boy usually left, pretending to be just another late-night mechanic checking his engine. Hood pulled low, hands in my pockets, eyes scanning the faint glow of streetlights bouncing off brick walls. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the familiar growl of the red Mustang announced his departure. He laughed loudly, the stereo booming, completely unaware that someone had been watching, calculating, memorizing every nuance of his routine. His arrogance was precise, predictable. It was a flaw I intended to exploit. The alleyways were narrow, the turns sharp, and the blind corners waiting like traps. Over the past weeks, I had studied them meticulously. Every curve, every street light, every misaligned sign. I had moved a few markers, subtle but deadly, enough to turn a familiar route into an unpredictable puzzle. I didn't need weapons, I didn't need a chase. All I needed was timing, precision, and his confidence against him. The Mustang screamed through the first corner perfectly, over the second without incident. But the third? That was where I had shifted the sign, a subtle lie in the night, a gentle misdirection, enough to confuse someone not paying attention, someone who thought they owned the streets. The tires squealed, metal screeched, a soft crash, then silence. The stereo's thump died in the darkness. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just listened to the hissing engine and the faint pop of twisting steel. It was done. The morning brought sirens and whispers. The mayor arrived, badge crooked, suit wrinkled, the weight of disbelief heavy on his shoulders. His son was gone, and though he didn't yet know the details, the message was clear. Someone had been watching. Someone had been waiting. He looked at me, eyes wide, trying to gauge whether he should threaten or beg, but words failed him. I stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the grease and oil from my coveralls, and said softly, "You own this town, but you never owned me." His flinch said everything. I turned away before he could recover, letting the wreckage speak for itself. The red Mustang, a symbol of privilege and recklessness, was now silent. And for Michael, sleeping just blocks away, nothing had changed. He still believed the streets were safe. He still believed in quiet protection. But for me, silence had taken on a new meaning. It was no longer just waiting or watching. It was a weapon honed over decades, capable of striking through arrogance, entitlement, and the myth of untouchable power. The town would whisper about the accident for weeks, speculating and gossiping, but they would never know who truly orchestrated it. And the mayor? Every morning he would wake with the sound of that collision echoing in his mind. Every night he would remember that no kingdom is unshakable when someone knows how to use silence as a blade. I returned to my garage, wiped the grease from my hands, and listened to the faint hum of engines. The world thought nothing had changed, but in the shadows, the streets belonged to no one, not even the sons of men who believed themselves above the law. And for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Silence can kill, but sometimes it can also protect. The streets were quiet, but every corner held a secret. I was no longer just a father. I was the shadow that reminded power it could fall. The day after the accident, the town hummed with muted confusion. Rumors flitted like restless birds, each whisper a small spark of truth hidden in layers of fear. The mayor's nephew was gone, and no one knew why. But the absence was enough to shift the air. People walked slower, glancing over their shoulders, sensing the invisible weight pressing down on them. I, meanwhile, returned to the rhythm of ordinary life. At the garage, I worked on engines, polished metal, and listened to the familiar whine of machines. Michael stopped by, asking questions with the innocence only a 20-year-old can wield. "Did you hear about the Mustang?" he asked casually. I just nodded, masking the storm I had orchestrated in the shadows. But the truth was, the first move was only the beginning. Arrogance leaves patterns, and patterns leave gaps. I spent the next nights walking the town in silence, observing, mapping, memorizing. The mayor's office, the deputies, even the local reporters, all unaware that someone had entered their world and would not leave until the scales balanced.
I thought back to my days in the Secret Service, the precision, the discipline, the patience. I realized it wasn't only the physical skills that mattered. It was the psychology. Predictable behavior could be anticipated. Hubris could be manipulated. Fear could be measured and applied. And the mayor's family had all of it in abundance. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I spotted a familiar figure, the mayor, pacing outside his office, muttering threats into the wind as if the town itself would carry them. His arrogance remained unbroken, yet in the subtlest moments I saw it, the flicker of doubt, the tiny cracks in the facade. I smiled quietly to myself. I had learned long ago that patience is a weapon, one that cuts deeper than anger. The boy had taught me that much. His recklessness had given me the opening. The mayor's continued pride would provide the next. I began to set the stage for the second lesson. Signs, lights, and shadows, all ranged so that any misstep would echo far beyond a single street. I didn't have to chase him. I didn't have to confront him. I just had to let the weight of preparation and observation meet his predictable pride. Meanwhile, Michael's world remained untouched, a fragile bubble of safety. He believed in quiet evenings and familiar streets. He believed his father was just an old man who fixed cars. And perhaps, for now, that belief was enough. I returned home one night and sat in the quiet living room listening to the tick of the clock. The city outside carried on as if nothing had changed, but I knew better. I knew the mayor's world had shifted, even if he refused to admit it. Every time he opened his eyes, he would see the possibility of failure lurking behind every street corner. And in that silence, I found a strange comfort. It was no longer just revenge. It was a reminder that control is fragile, that arrogance is fleeting, and that even in the smallest town, justice can be precise, unseen, and utterly devastating. Some lessons don't need shouting. Some victories speak quietly, but their echo lasts forever.
I had waited weeks for this night. Every detail was in place, every shadow accounted for. One wrong move and it would all collapse. But tonight, the streets would finally speak. The night air was thick, carrying the faint scent of gasoline and wet asphalt. I parked my old pickup on a quiet side street, hood pulled low, a ghost in the dim light. I watched the familiar glow of the diner across the street, knowing he would appear like clockwork, just as he had every Friday for the past month. At 11:47 p.m., the red Mustang roared to life, stereo blasting, laughter spilling into the empty avenues. The boy, so confident, so certain that the night was his playground. He didn't see me, and he never would. Not yet. I had adjusted the signs days before, subtle changes that would disorient anyone who relied solely on speed and arrogance. Every corner had been studied, every shadow noted. The alley where he would make his fatal turn had been mapped and memorized, a silent trap waiting patiently for its target. As he barreled down the streets, I counted the beats of the stereo, the rhythm of his tires on the pavement, the angle of the headlights bouncing off walls. He took the first turn with ease, the second without incident, but the third, that was where the misdirection took hold, the subtle change, the small lie in the dark. Tires screamed, metal groaned, a sudden sharp impact, then silence. The stereo died mid-note. No chase, no shouting, no weapons, just the precision of timing, observation, and anticipation. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just listened, my heart steady, my mind calculating the aftermath. The boy had learned a lesson he would never forget, and the mayor would wake tomorrow to the harsh reality that no amount of privilege could shield him from consequences he refused to acknowledge. By dawn, the mayor arrived, slouched and disheveled, badge crooked, suit wrinkled, trying to comprehend the absence of his son. Our eyes met across the quiet alley. For a brief moment, he understood. Not how it happened, not the mechanics, but that I had been here, that I had waited, and that he had underestimated what silence could accomplish. I stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the oil and iron on my hands, and said softly, "You own this town, but you never owned me." His flinch was enough. Words failed him. Threats, excuses, begging, all useless in the presence of calculated silence. I turned away, letting the wreckage speak for itself. The red Mustang, a symbol of unchecked power and arrogance, lay silent in the early light. Back at home, Michael slept, oblivious to the chaos and justice that had unfolded just blocks away. To him, life remained unchanged, a bubble of innocence preserved. And for me, that was enough. The streets had been set right, not with noise or anger, but with the quiet force of someone who had learned how to turn silence into power. Sometimes the loudest lessons leave no sound at all, and sometimes the quietest father can become the most formidable guardian of all. In the end, silence became more powerful than anger, and in that silence I found a justice the town would never see coming. The days that followed were strangely calm. The town whispered about the disappearance, the accident, the red Mustang that no longer roared through its streets. The mayor was restless, pacing the office, muttering threats that had no audience. He had been stripped of certainty, and in its place, fear lingered like fog in the alleys he once ruled. Michael went about his life, blissfully unaware. He fixed cars with me in the garage, joked about small things, and laughed as if the world had remained unchanged. That innocence, that quiet trust, was the reason I had endured the long nights and careful planning. To him, I was just a father, a retired mechanic who once worked on fancy engines. He didn't need to know the storm I had unleashed for his safety. I walked the streets, observing the town that had been my playground for years. Nothing seemed different, yet everything had shifted. The mayor would wake each morning with the echo of the crash in his mind, the faint memory of unpredictability haunting his routine. Every time he tried to assert control, the thought of that night would surface, a quiet reminder that power is fragile when arrogance blinds judgment. And me? I returned to my routine. The grease on my hands, the hum of engines, the smell of oil and gasoline. The town thought the streets were unchanged, that justice had been served by chance or accident. They were wrong. It was deliberate, calculated, silent. Silence had become my ally, my instrument, my message. I had learned long ago that noise can be deflected, threats can be ignored, but silence, carefully wielded, is unforgettable. It speaks louder than any shout, louder than any weapon. It leaves echoes that persist long after the moment has passed. The mayor's son never returned to his reckless ways, and the town slowly adopted. They didn't know the mechanics of his lesson, the precision of its execution, or the father who had orchestrated it. But they felt the ripple, subtle, yet undeniable. Arrogance had been tempered, fear had been instilled, and justice had been quietly restored. One evening I watched Michael sleep from the doorway.
peaceful and unaware. I smiled quietly, letting him keep his belief that the world was safe because his father was near. In truth, the streets were safer because someone knew how to turn silence into a weapon, into protection, into justice. Some victories are loud, some are quiet, and sometimes the quietest victories are the most profound of all. I wiped my hands on a rag, listened to the soft rumble of an engine outside, and thought, the world may never know the truth, but that's how it should be. Some stories are meant to live in shadows. Some justice is best left unspoken. And in that quiet, I found peace.